we become still, open and receptive, all kinds of wisdom services. It is our portal into our spiritual self, the truth of who we are. The stillness, the silence is golden. So we thank you, sweet Spirit, that any time we stop and turn our awareness toward your infinite goodness, we receive exactly what we need to remember the truth that sets us free. So thank you, sweet Spirit, that as we go about our moments having a human experience, that from time to time we have those moments when we feel your presence, not just know it in our heads. We feel it in our hearts, and we are grateful. So our affirmation this morning is that we are open and receptive to the living Spirit of truth, always within us, surrounding us, and flowing among us. So let us take a moment now, each of us in our own way, to just be present to the presence in the silence. Thank you, sweet Spirit. Thank you for these moments of remembering the truth that sets us free. We lift our eyes now and we say yes to life and yes to what you've called us to be, which is no less than the light of the world. This is our prayer. It is our decree. And so it is. And so we let it be. Amen, amen, and amen.
As far back as time goes along lines of love, we sit with hearts open, we sing from our souls. Become now forgiveness, become now whole. As far back as time goes along lines of love, we sit with hearts open, we sing from our souls. Become now forgiveness, become now whole. As far back as time goes along lines of love, embrace the love with hearts open, we sing
That's so beautiful. I love your music. Thank you, Kendra. Okay, let's talk about guilt. You know, Spirit moves in mysterious ways, a point to make, right? As I said earlier, Living Presence, the book, is acting like a catalyst to open up places that you just take for granted are fine. So I was leaving church this week, one day this week, pulled out on La Canada, turned left, and all of a sudden I became aware that I had a feeling of guilt. A feeling of guilt. And I went, wow, was that because I gunned it in front of that car? Or what, you know? So I started thinking about this. Guilt is the emotion that comes when we remember or recollect, so to speak, some regrettable action that we did. We get that emotion. But in this case, there wasn't anything I could identify. It was just an ubiquitous feeling of guilt. So I go to my go-to person, which is Dr. David R. Hawkins. And he has written a book called Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. And guilt is next to shame. Shame is at the bottom. And then there's guilt. So I started reading all about guilt. And I thought, is there such a thing as a collective guilt? An unconscious guilt? And sure enough, there's a whole section on the chapter on guilt about unconscious guilt. So I'm thinking, is this personal to me, or is this collective? What am I experiencing? And this is the thing about being spiritually awakened. Number one, you're more likely to even notice that you're feeling guilt. And number two, you know it's not personal even if it is personal. So, if that makes any sense. We have our own perceptions. So when we remember things, we're not necessarily remembering facts. We're remembering our perceptions at the time, the emotions that we're feeling at the time we remember something that we regret. And the good news is, a lot of time has passed, and we might have learned a few things. So, most people don't want to feel guilty. I mean, who wants to feel guilty, right? It's unpleasant, it can be painful, it can be deeply painful. However, there is constructive guilt. It's built in to our psyche. It's one of the ways that we get information about what we are creating, right? What we are creating. Oh, if you've got ubiquitous guilt, then stop, be still, turn within, and ask. Ask the Spirit, what is this about? So, I'm not going to confess to you. However, I'm pretty certain I know where that was coming from. And I have the opportunity now to shift and say, okay, this is out of principle. It's out of spiritual principles. And it's time I practice what I preach, which I try to do, which brings up this collective guilt. How often do we, as human beings, tell a half-truth? Yeah, what we said was true, but it wasn't the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And we can rationalize our behavior, our attitudes. We can justify it. But the real self knows better. And it doesn't go away. So when you least expect it, out of the blue comes this conviction of the Spirit, is what some of the other churches I've attended in my life would call it. A conviction of the Spirit. Busted. You're guilty. Woo, okay, doesn't mean I'm not lovable. But with this awareness, with working with this week, this song kept going through and round my mind. So I'm going to read you the lyrics. This was originally sung by Bonnie Raitt. I came across it with Madeleine Perot, one of my very favorite artists. I'm going to read you the whole thing. It's called Guilty. Yeah, baby, I've been drinking, and I shouldn't come by, I know. But I found myself in trouble, darling, and I had nowhere else to go. Got some whiskey from a barman, got some cocaine from a friend. I just had to keep on moving till I was back in your arms again. Well, I'm guilty. Yeah, I'm guilty. I'll be guilty for the rest of my life. How come I never do what I'm supposed to do? How come nothing that I try to do ever turns out right? Well, you know how it is with me, baby. You know I just can't stand myself. It takes a whole lot of medicine for me to pretend to be somebody else. Yeah, that's quite the song, isn't it? That feeling that I'm not good enough, that everything I do is not in alignment, and the core of it is self-love, learning to love yourself, to forgive yourself, and to expand your awareness beyond the ego conditioning. We're all conditioned as kids. Don't do this, don't do that. And we all make mistakes. That's inherent in the human experience. That's how we learn and grow. My first Unity minister used to say, well, if it hurts when you do that, don't do that. Just that simple. So there's no judgment about it. Now, when we really do offend someone else or do things that we wish we hadn't done, it's absolutely appropriate to make amends and to say that from the heart. But when it's your own self, when you are holding your own self hostage, you are cutting yourself off from your divine self, rather than just saying, okay, well, learned that, not going to do that again, and then move on. Eventually we get to the point where we know all things further us. Every single experience, every single thing we do is furthering our evolution if we are aware of the spiritual self. So, walking moment by moment with an awareness of spirit will help us to see where we misstepped and go, okay, not going to do that again. And guilt doesn't have to be about offending other people. It could be as simple as, well, I didn't put the lid back on the jar. I'm serious. What happens when we're not aware of what we're feeling? It gets repressed, and then it gets compacted, more and more and more. Dr. Hawkins said that this is common in our society, this feeling of guilt. And because we're not perfect like we think we should be, which is totally unrealistic, we wouldn't learn a thing if we were perfect, right? So here we go. He says this is the core of a lot of discord in our society. People not feeling worthy and feeling guilty and repressing it. And when we repress it, we get a real big projection outward. Why aren't you perfect? Why aren't you perfect? How could you do such a thing? It's all coming from me. All of that judgment is coming from me and coming from my repressed acceptance of self. So then what happens? You get a lot of people, lets you and them fight. What do you say? You know? And then we start projecting our judgment. We start vilifying other people for not being perfect. And everybody's guilty. The truth of the matter is, we are innocent. Any mistake we made, there's a divine purpose for it. And that's why it's so important to forgive. To forgive yourself, to ask forgiveness from other people. And if somebody asks you for forgiveness, give it. You know, I will never forgive you for blah, 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 blah. You know? Well, we know that's only hurting ourselves, isn't it? Isn't it? Do you want to be guilty for the rest of your life? Don't you want to know who you truly are? Your power as a spiritual being, to release, to be free, to love, to walk the walk. Walk the walk. It really doesn't matter what we believe so much. What is important is what we internalize and live. Live it. So, that little guilty episode driving my car down La Cañada was a wake-up. And I'm grateful that I was aware enough at the time to even know what I was feeling. And beyond that, to question it. Take your experience, because it's your daily lesson, and begin to work with it so that you can receive the gift of the Spirit. The gift of the Spirit is communication with you only if we are alive, alert, awake, and enthusiastic about our own spiritual growth. So, I've had a very fun week playing around with my guilt because I know it has come to bless me. There's excessive guilt. Oh, I'm a terrible person. And, you know, that's toxic. That's toxic. But guilt, there's nothing wrong with a little touch of it. It's your spiritual self, your higher self, communicating with you. Pay attention to this. Pay attention to it. There are other emotions that come to bless us too that we'd rather not welcome them into our house. But the best way to get rid of guilt is to reframe it. Rather than wallowing in it, hiding it, denying it, we do welcome it. Say, okay, you've come to bless me. What is the blessing? What is it I need to pay more attention to? Because nobody else is having my experience but me. When we're conditioned, you know, there's so many do's and don'ts and do's and don'ts, and that's so we'll become good little people, you know? Good people. We become good people when we have compassion for one another, when we can forgive. And remember that none of us have done anything wrong. Even if you do the worst thing imaginable. Either God's in charge or God isn't. There's something for us to learn always. And one of the things we learn is to make better choices. To make better choices as we go along. So guilt is a touchy subject, but that's what was given to me, and I would feel guilty if I didn't give it to you. So, all right. We have lots of teachers. They come in all sizes, shapes, and colors. All kinds of experiences. Welcome your life. Realize when you're blessed with guilt, because it's going to help you align back in to practicing what it is you believe. I mean, guilt only happens because we violated our own values, right? We violated our own values. So, and you know what? That was yesterday. And yesterday's gone. Moment by moment by moment. There's a story in the Bible, one of my favorites. Jesus was teaching in the temple, and they brought this woman who was caught in adultery. Oh, guilty, 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 right? Oh, okay. They brought this woman, and they said, look at her, she was caught red-handed. And they were thinking that they were going to trap Jesus. And Jesus just simply, he didn't condemn her. He just said, let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. Guilty. One by one, all of her accusers left. One by one. Think of this in terms of consciousness, your own accusing thoughts. One by one, these thoughts are released. And then Jesus, representing the Christ self that each of us is. Where are your accusers? And she said, there aren't any. And he said, neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Go and sin no more. Which is to say, let yourself off the hook. Learn from your experience, because your Christ self does not judge you. Your Christ self knows that you're having a human experience, and that the way you evolve is by making bad choices from time to time. Bad choices. Learn to love yourself no matter what. No matter what. Because that's the primary lesson for being here. We can say love one another, absolutely, but you cannot love someone else until you love yourself. And I know that from experience, from mistakes I have made. And I am not guilty about that. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for it. So, make guilt your friend. How about that? I think that's, I'll look at my notes. Maybe there'll be an addendum. Thank you.
Join us in singing I'm Choosing Heaven today. It's in the bulletins. I'm choosing heaven today.
Okay.
I'm choosing heaven today. I am walking the road. choosing peace today. I'm choosing peace today. I am walking the road of heaven right now, singing, I'm choosing peace today. I'm choosing forgiveness today. I'm choosing forgiveness today. I am walking the road of heaven right now, singing, I'm choosing forgiveness today. I'm choosing love today. I'm choosing love today. I am walking the road of heaven right now, singing, I'm choosing love today. Let's choose some life. I'm choosing life today. I'm choosing life today. I am walking the road of heaven right now, singing, I'm choosing life today. All right, one more. Compassion. I'm choosing compassion today. I'm choosing compassion today. I am walking the road of heaven right now, singing, choosing compassion today. Let's wrap this up. I'm choosing heaven today. I'm choosing heaven today. I am walking the road of heaven right now, singing, I'm choosing heaven today.
Okay. There are a few little nuggets here on this piece of paper. Society has concern that the guilty will go unpunished. No such thing is possible, spiritually speaking. No such thing is possible. We reap what we sow. The vibration of our consciousness, the frequency, whether it's a high frequency of unconditional love and peace and joy, or whether we're down in the guilty, shame, apathetic, and down in the lower vibrations, it's its own reward. And because the frequencies match, we will attract according to the level of our consciousness. So, one's own consciousness is its own reward. Birds of a feather do flock together because they are attuned to the